Good afternoon and welcome to this AI Roundtable, the next frontier for the enterprise, the human-AI collaboration. Before we start, just go over a short disclaimer. All the materials in here are for informational purposes only, and the reader is hereby cautioned that the actual product development may vary significantly from roadmaps. These are just the opinions of our speakers today, and they're not held on behalf of Progress Software. You can pause this on the on-demand recording if you like. This will go on demand shortly after this presentation. So, joining myself today will be Matthieu Jonglez. He is the VP of Technology for our Progress Data Platform. Imran Chowdhury, the Principal Sales Engineer, MarkLogic and Semaphore. Also joining us will be Alan Flett, Senior Product Manager at Semaphore, and John Snelson, Software Fellow for MarkLogic and Semaphore, and Rob Rudin, Principal Software Engineer for MarkLogic. So, this is definitely the era of disruptive generative AI. There have been a whole host of recent developments, not least of which was ChatGPT taking center stage early last year, earning over 100 million users, the fastest consumer application to reach that level, beating the likes of Instagram and Facebook easily on that. But there's a fear of missing out for many decision makers, forcing them to look at the investments that they're making in this area. And the message is kind of loud and clear, really, after last year's sort of trials and experiments, which is if you want to make a successful AI, if you want it to really be this generative AI disruption, then you're going to need rich and properly governed data. It's almost a prerequisite. It should almost be point one of your action plan for AI. Now, so here's a quote from a very distinguished VP analyst at Gartner. I think it speaks to some of the problems and also what business is trying to do. Organizations aren't just talking about AI, they're investing time, money, and resources to move it forward and drive business outcomes. Generative AI is now on CEOs' boards and agendas as they seek to take advantage of this transformative potential of this technology. And what is that potential? Well, there is a significant amount of research that's going into this, looking at the potential of AI from an economic perspective. Just from generative AI alone, so not the other areas of AI, but you're looking between 6.1 to 7.9 trillion dollars worth of impact annually to the global economy. 500 million jobs created off the back of this. You know, it really is looking at a number of different use cases where generative AI might be applicable. This is a great quote that kind of outlines that. But there's a whole host of productivity increases and new ways of working that are going to transform the way knowledge workers work in their everyday lives, whether that be from using email to coding to creating businesses. It's already believed that there will be the $1 billion self-made millionaire or billionaire, should I say, from a single person. So today we're going to talk about some of this impact. We're going to talk about why, as we've mentioned, that data is so important to us, and we're going to do that with a roundtable. We're going to cover off some key topics along the way, and hopefully have a really interesting conversation for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them. If we can't get to them before the end of the presentation, or if we overrun, then we'll make sure to follow up with you afterwards. But for the agenda today, we're going to be discussing the need for agile technologies to leverage AI in the enterprise, evolution of data accessibility for the workforce, AI trends and emerging customer-centric use cases, a strategic integration of AI into business processes for driving efficiency and productivity, And finally, ethical considerations, biases, fairness, and responsibility that we all have in AI development. So with that, let's begin our roundtable. So let's start the roundtable discussion. We're going to introduce our speakers again. We have Matthieu Jonglez, we've got Alan Flett, we've got John Snelson, Rob Rudin, and Imran Chowdhury, all eager to answer the questions that I've promised them won't be very difficult to answer. I'm sure there'll be some good discussion outside of those as well. So I wanted to start with the need for agile technologies, to really leverage AI in the enterprise. And I wanted to start, I'm going to put Rob on the spot here, of the importance of preparing your data, manipulating the pipeline of the data that's coming in this age of large language models and generative AI.
Yeah, so I think our experience so far has been, we want to make it easy to get lots and lots of different types of data into MarkLogic and then be able to get it out in a variety of formats. But our experience has been that there is going to be some massaging that's needed to get the data out of MarkLogic into a format that works with an LLM tool. Often, one of the strengths of MarkLogic is we can store very large documents and slice and dice them in various ways when we're outputting them. But LLM tools tend to want fairly small chunks of text that are relevant to the user's queries. So right away, there's the need to be able to do a search against data in MarkLogic, but return the results in fairly small bytes that we can hand off to the LLM tool. And how that's done is going to differ for customers based on how they're modeling their data.
Yeah, and I guess it's different now as well with the rise of sort of multimodal responses back from the Gen AI itself. So it's not just text that's coming back. It can be images, it can be video, and obviously, users are going to want to store that data in some way, shape, or form as well, possibly, to inform the knowledge model that might be behind that data.
What we've seen as well, I mean, this is just applying things that we've said for a long time about MarkLogic. We call ourselves an agile data platform, and that's because compared to an ETL process, with an ETL process, you process the data before it gets into MarkLogic or into the database, and it takes a long time to do that. And if you need to iterate on that and go back and change something that you previously decided on, it takes a long time to redo that process.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that we describe ourselves as agile as a database is because we make it easy to have the data in MarkLogic and progressively enhance that data and change your mind effectively about what you want the data to look like. And what we've seen as people take on LLM projects is we've seen that they get to a point where they realize they really needed to change the data, change the inputs to tweak the outputs that they're going to get from the LLM. And that iterative process is a lot quicker using an agile platform like MarkLogic than it would be using traditional database technologies.
From a semaphore point of view, then, and I briefly touched on it a minute ago by mentioning knowledge graphs. What does semaphore and knowledge graphs, what role do they play? Quite an important role in some cases with Gen AI.
So, when thinking of querying LLMs and trying to get the best out of them, semaphore and knowledge graphs more generally, the more conceptual context you can provide that aligns with the user's query, the better result you're going to get out of the large language model and the Gen AI. It's as simple as that, really. And Semaphore provides a very usable way of building such knowledge graphs up, those entities and edges and relationships and so on. Provides a very neat way of doing that, and and helping to power that query using such models.
if you put it all together, the agility from the MarkLogic side, the knowledge graph from the semaphore side, the explanation that Rob gave about how essentially RAG is a hack, right? To try and fit in a very small context the information we have from various documents. It leads us to a slightly different way of feeding LLMs, which is instead of returning document fragments that are relevant to the query and packaging that in a context, passing it to as an input, we're now in a position where we can extract segments of graphs and provide a lot more context in a much more compact environment. What it does is it removes some level of interpretation from the LLM computational stage, because we've done that up front, understanding the context, understanding the topics, understanding the facts. So you end up with less room for error, less, more precision, less hallucinations, which is also an interesting element here. But the ability, because in the knowledge graph, or at least in the section of the knowledge graph you're passing in the prompt, the ability to pack a lot more context, therefore a lot more recall of the data you had originally. So in the same way that metadata in the search world was a way to break the precision recall dilemma and increase your F1 score, injecting knowledge graph in LLMs today is that same way of breaking the precision recall challenge. And that challenge is actually a challenge that customers are facing in wild. We were talking only a few days ago to a customer who had to put a very, very severe thresholding on his document retrieval because he was faced with a document set, a data source, where the semantic distance between data points, between documents, was quite large. And that meant that, yes, things were coming back using similarity search, but they were not that similar. And when you combine search and fact extraction, knowledge graph, and all those sort of things, you can filter essentially, slice and dice your document set in different ways, meaning you're doing similarity search on things that are similar enough. So you've got the best of both worlds.
In terms of graphs and graph authoring and semantics, if we think about sort of the standard way a lot of people are doing semantic search with very small large language models, small these days because they only have 250 billion parameters or 350 million parameters, versus like the latest version of ChatGPT, which is someplace between 1.5 and almost 2 trillion parameters. The understanding of the real world is a lot more semantically sound in the larger model than it is in the smaller model, because when you go to a smaller model, you're compressing out a lot of the understanding so that you can compute on it and generate those sort of semantic vectors very rapidly. But if, on the other hand, you use a large semantic model to help generate the base graph that you want to use and then feed that into Semaphore, now you're getting a really good understanding of the real world because you're using these large, most up-to-date, most recent models to create your graphs. And yet you can take that understanding, merge it with human understanding through Semaphore, and get a much higher accuracy of semantic search coming back at you that can then be fed to the large language model for context, as we've already described.
It's also really interesting to see how the different topics, domain, vertical areas are actually covered by those semantic models, and by the trainings that have gone through some of those LLMs. I mean, if you take, I don't know, a stupid example, diesel, gas, fuel. Those are sufficiently topical, sufficiently used in everyday's vocabulary to be pretty much synonymous. And from a vector similarity perspective, so there'll be no problem. They'll be found. If you start to look at more scientific data, medical data, etc., only the more advanced models, I suppose, those that have been trained on more data, have more data points, will start doing matching on things like, I don't know, Xolair and omalizumab are the same thing. You start to be in something that is almost enterprise-like, but not quite, because that's public knowledge. Now, the fact that part 1, 2, 3, 4 is used in assembly ABC, none of the models are going to be trained on that, because that's your private intellectual property. And that's where the semantic modeling is really important. So you don't have to retrain something into identifying those relationships.
You're taking that enterprise knowledge and combining that with the public LLMs model, and you're basically getting the best of both worlds there. Imran, why is fine-tuning a model not worth the investment, and why are people focusing on RAG then? Why? What's the difference there?
So there's multiple things that go on when you have to fine tune a model. One is you have to have documents that the model hasn't seen before that are relevant, that you want to feed into the model. So you have to do that data prep. Second, once you have those documents and you start training the model and you start adjusting the weights of the model, then the model may respond better for those documents, but may start responding worse for other concepts that weren't further trained on it. So there's this possibility of degradation of non-trained skills or non-trained knowledge that happens. Third, when you do take your private documents and put these into a large language model, the security of the content that now the large language model remembers has to match the security of all of the documents that it was trained on, and not just a few of them, because people who may or may not have access to the original documents can, through question and answer and through memory recall, can recreate a large chunk, 60 to 80% of the documents that the system was trained on, or the knowledge that the system was trained on. So there's a huge security IP leakage concern. There's the compute concern. There's a reduction in skills concern. All of these things can be mitigated very, very well when you go to a RAG model where the document security and the element level security matches the security of the user that's asking the question. So if a user has access to, let's say, 1 billion documents and he asks a question, then all of those 1 billion documents are fair game to feed to the LLM. But on the other hand, if you have another user coming in and they only have access to 1,000 documents, well, then you shouldn't be feeding any of those other, things in beyond 1,000 documents to the LLM. And that's how we can sort of really tightly control what the LLM gets based on what the user has the rights to see, and that allows security to flow through to the end user and through the LLM's answers.
So like features like our advanced security, like Semaphore's ability to identify PII information, things like that can all be applied to the data way before it actually gets to a public model. Therefore, you've got enterprise security while still being able to take advantage of those large language models in public.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The security aspect of that is really important. But also fundamentally at a technology level. I mean, LLMs are based on technology that's modeled after our brain. If you had a large corpus of documents that you wanted to ask questions about, would you tell some guy to sit there and read all the documents and then ask that guy some questions about them? Right? That technology is just not designed for maximum recall of precise amounts of data, large amounts of data with precision. And so LLMs are unlikely to ever gain the ability to do that well. It makes sense to use the right technology for the right kind of task. And when you have that large corpus of documents, the right technology is a database or a search engine which is able to index those accurately and provide you with much better recall of those things. And so for that reason, I don't expect to see LLMs changing in the future to be able to do that. I think that fundamentally the technology is not suitable for that, and we're always going to be using a better technology to deal with large corpus of documents.
And that kind of moves us on to that evolution of technology, so the evolution of that data accessibility for the workforce and how LLMs can kind of enable that. And there's some tools out there that can be integrated certainly with our technology, and I know one of them is LangChain. Rob, how do we integrate with LangChain, and more importantly, why have we chosen to do so?
So for the first question, the simplest answer is we create a retriever that allows for data to be retrieved from MarkLogic and then fed into LangChain to help resolve the user's question. Now, I think one of the benefits of MarkLogic here is we have several different query languages. There's a variety of ways thus for us to retrieve data. There's all kinds of opportunities for transforming and massaging that data. Our experience has been each customer is probably going to want to do some testing and some fine tuning based on their own data model. MarkLogic has a very flexible and powerful set of indexes. The customer will most likely want to leverage a lot of the existing indexes that they already have in place for their application. They may want to add some new indexes as well. And all of that we think is very easy to take advantage of within a LangChain retriever. So it gives the customer the ability to hopefully get the most relevant data fed back into LangChain. And particularly in conjunction with MarkLogic, I think it is the sort of thing where a customer can quickly start getting results and start that iterative process of adding indexes, tuning the system, and hopefully getting a result that they're satisfied with.
Yeah, Imran, I think you've been doing some work in that area.
Yeah, so in terms of LangChain, one is it tends to abstract a lot of the day-to-day sort of minutia of calling a large language model from the end user. So the ability to think about how to interact with it at a conversational level is more where LangChain fits. Another thing I'd like to say is that LangChain has like connectors to every large language model out there, or everyone that's probably a month or so old, right? And they keep updating it, and so the ability to switch between large language models is pretty trivial when you go and use a LangChain system. Now, what's really cool is that because we are sort of positioned as a large language model independent memory, we also enable the ability to switch between large language models and see how the same content and the same large language model memory can be used across different large language models with different retrieval rates, with different success rates and things like that. So it enables a lot of trial and error and a lot of fail fast type of work that can happen very, very rapidly with large language models and MarkLogic together with LangChain.
What's also interesting in that context is that different use cases call for different LLMs.
Yeah.
We've seen clients be very successful with ChatGPT for some human interaction, with some SSM for more predictive analytics. I was talking the other day with one who was playing with Mistral. There's all sorts of things here that might behave better in some use cases. So our role with MarkLogic is not to create yet another data silo that will be fit for purpose for one use case. No, it's to manage your enterprise knowledge, to manage, to help you build a data fabric and enable you to use any and all of those techniques, any and all of those LLMs as a conduit to deliver particular use cases. So a LangChain approach is interesting because exactly as you just heard, it opens up the door to so many of those tools with a single place, a single source of truth.
So there is one thing that you can't get away from, and that's hallucinations in Gen AI. According to Datanami, it can be anywhere between 15 and 20% of open Gen AIs that are out there right now. How are we combating that? How are we trying to avoid that? And also, how are we trying to identify and minimize the impact of these on businesses? Imran, I know you've done some work with customers in that area. Maybe you could take that.
hallucinations are not so much errors in the Gen AI, but they're more the lack of context for the Gen AI. So the Gen AI system doesn't really understand that, the context of a heart attack in a emergency room is 99285 for a biller, right? But if we can provide that context around as feeding that data from our long-term memory into the system, then the hallucinations naturally get reduced, because the predictions of the next word and the next word and the next word are more accurate, because the running sort of string of words that it's seeing are much more useful than not having that context.
There's another interesting aspect of this, which is if you're a developer faced with a response from the LLM, which is wrong, how do you figure out what happened? Why did it happen? Why is this wrong? And when you're using vector embedding techniques to do similarity search, you don't have any traceability. The answer to why did it bring back this particular document is because it did. That's what your classifier did. Now, there are alternative technologies for doing similarity search, and the search engine has methods of doing that. And using a semantic search with a knowledge graph, such that Semaphore might produce for you, also allows you to kind of do semantic search and similarity on that semantic level. The interesting thing about that is that because your business experts have described your business domain and produced this knowledge model, you've got traceability all the way back to why it decided that the topic of this paragraph or this document was a certain thing. And that traceability allows you to diagnose what went wrong and what didn't go wrong. So, there are all sorts of scenarios, I think, that people are going to be starting to try and do, which maybe combine knowledge graph similarity search, semantic search, with vector embedding semantic search, simply because when the vector gets it wrong, the knowledge graph is there to maybe say, hey, something's gone wrong, this doesn't agree with the knowledge graph, or maybe they work together to improve the accuracy of the similarity that's done. And so, I think that's an important aspect of it. Like, you do need to be able to debug these things sometimes.
And the multi-approach, using different technologies to the best of their ability, to collaborate on the best possible results, is actually something that is coming into the market. Research on combining BM25 with vector similarity, for example, like 3-4 months ago, has already proven a significant improvement in precision. And now, even we're talking about LangChain a minute ago. LangGraph, as a adjunct to LangChain, providing reentrant and multi-stage approaches, is helping achieve higher level of precision, stateful interactions, with the view to find a better context up front, having the ability to, in the case of ambiguity, disambiguate which context the user actually meant, and post-process a result to actually hide out the information coming from the wrong context. And that's actually something that's very useful to support the decision, or to support the summary of the answer being provided, link to the actual document supporting the evidence.
And again, it kind of brings it back to what we've been talking for a while now, and across multiple events and content that we've put out. It's that human in the loop of all of that. When you were mentioning it, it was kind of, there's the user, there's the business expert, there's the data experts that are in your business. You're not using AI as a replacement. You're using AI to augment that human knowledge and scale it to a machine scale, which is, like I say, a really interesting, and I think going to generate more accurate results. And that's kind of another question then, Imran, is how are we going to democratize the access to Gen AI?
So, democratizing access means a lot of things to a lot of different people. One is the ability to give the right people access to the right data will help democratize the access. And so security and sending that secure information properly through the system will provide more, I would say, comfort with people using the system. The ability to understand when things are correct is also a really important part of the puzzle. So the ability to take the answer of a Gen AI and run it through a knowledge graph to further validate that the answer is in the ballpark will help get you the right answers. And then the ability to use different kinds of Gen AIs for different types of use cases and solutions will help you reduce costs and thereby improve access. And also, because MarkLogic tends to interact with the knowledge graphs in a natural language sort of way, we can use it as a universal natural language Q&A or task completion cache. And retrieving content from MarkLogic is a lot less expensive than regenerating content from scratch every single time, especially if the question is a frequently asked question. So a lot of these things will play into helping you get the cost down and the accuracy up and the security up, and that will help with the ubiquity and usefulness of the large language models within your enterprise.
Bill, there's potentially something to add here, which is, yes, I mean, AI is a game changer, absolutely. It's already making significant impact at our customers. It's already making significant impact, in our own operations. But we need to set the right expectations to avoid disappointments.
Yep.
100%. I don't know if you're following the trending infoxication and infobesity, intoxication and obesity of information, from all of the amount of auto-generated content that's being thrown at us. But that's a reality. I mean, Gen AI is very useful to answer genuine business questions. It's also very useful to do absolutely nonsense stuff to a large degree. And maybe there's a fine balance to be found here, because what happened last time that promises around AI were not fulfilled, where we had criticism and disappointments like we are today, where people realized that technology was brittle and hard to maintain and hard to apply because data wasn't ready, and funding stopped. That was the AI winter. I think we have a duty of care here to help our partners, our customers, the market, understanding the real investment in data to be successful here, and apply Gen AI techniques to high value use case. It's easy enough on low value use case to demonstrate something interesting, but how do you leverage that? How do you go beyond the demonstrator?
Yeah, I mean, there's a discussion there because, a lot of the McKinseys and the Gartners of the world are advising people to look at, I mean, Gartner's very much like the knowledge graphs in the very center of their impact radar, latest impact radar. But as a part of that process, it's find a use case in your business that's going to demonstrate value within a year in your business, not with your customers necessarily, but in your business, on business processes within that, and then build from there, rather than look at a ubiquitous overall, this is going to change the way I do business AI solution that you're going to roll out to every customer. And again, that comes down to that responsibility, I think, between sort of over promising and under delivering. I think I can see a process in the business right now that's flawed. I think I can solve that with Gen AI. Give me 8 to 16 weeks. We'll sort that out, and then we'll test, and then we'll iterate. And then once we've proved it in our business, then again you become an expert within that solution, and then you go to your customers and go, we can do the same for you. And whilst you're having these other conversations, I think with customers, I think it's an interesting approach. What are your thoughts there on that, Matthieu?
I don't disagree, so long as in the Gen AI will help me solve that in 8 to 10 to 16 weeks, the assumption is not that Gen AI on its own will solve it, because the reality, and for us, as software editors, it's fantastic, right? Because it starts out with a hype, with the CIO says, if we miss Gen AI, then we've missed the boat, right? Well, reality is you'll need to invest in data management, in data governance, in data quality, in data enrichment, in all of those things that we cherish, we love, and we've done for years. And if that decision to invest in Gen AI allows you to actually see the light and invest in the data in the right way, then great, you'll be successful, we will be successful with you, and we will do Gen AI justice. But if you think that you can just throw it on top of your existing system, existing data, and hope for the best, those are the type of projects that come in for a surprise.
Kind of around that sort of topic, and John, you might be able to answer this in terms of the development. How are you planning to enable access to different AI tools, make it easy, scalable, using maybe some of the security features that we have in the underlying sort of technologies of MarkLogic and Semaphore?
We tend to build in layers in MarkLogic, and we heard from Rob earlier talking about how we've integrated into the LangChain toolset. And that's one aspect of it, but that's a layer around the outside of the database. And obviously there will be a lot of ease of use work to be done in some of those layers, the APIs, the REST endpoints, the clients that we have for MarkLogic. Really, that's going to be a matter of following the market, I think. When we see that it's worth some investment in a particular area because there's a weight of people heading in that direction, then that's the kind of thing we'll do. But all of that is built on top of what we can already do in the database core, and we do have a number of kind of ways in which we hope to extend that in the future. We've already kind of touched on some of the things that are actually already really useful for integrating using RAG with LLMs. Just using knowledge graphs to do, RDF graphs to do semantic search, where you search based on concepts rather than on keywords, is one of those. The full text search that's built into MarkLogic and some of the scoring technologies we heard about BM25 earlier. That's a newer addition to MarkLogic that's going to be released soon. But we have other full text scoring algorithms already released and with customers right now. Looking forwards, what we want to be able to do is integrate all of the technologies that people are using to provide information for kind of a RAG-based approach to integrating with an LLM. So that has to include working with vector embeddings at some point. And so we've got a number of scenarios which we're looking at enabling in the MarkLogic core in the future. One of those is focusing on the integration between vector similarity and existing search scoring technique. I think, that a lot of the buzz out there in the market now is about vector embeddings and how they can be used to do that. But we see problems with that kind of stuff as well. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the successful projects that are done in this way combine multiple technologies to get their results, correct for their end users. And of course, that means not only understanding your data, as we've talked about, and really kind of pre-processing that properly, and maybe having Semaphore kind of understand it for you and tell you what it's about from that kind of top-down perspective. But it also involves carefully weighting the output of search queries, boosting the scores, also figuring out how accurate vector embeddings are giving you, what level of score influence they have on the score for what you return to the LLM as kind of context and input. That whole process, the data curation and the search tweaking and tuning to get to the right place where you're when you're actually bringing back the right let me give you an example here. I mean, you may have a lot of documents that talk about your topic of interest. I don't know, mining. Let's say you've got a lot of documents that talk in general terms about mining. You've got some specific ones that talk about the mining operations that you're interested in and the details of those things. Now, a simple tweak in that circumstance may be to weight the documents that talk about your mining operations rather than general mining, because the LLM, you're targeting it to users who care about what you're doing in mining, not what the whole world is doing in mining. So that kind of tweaking at the search end is also important as well.
Let's look at some of the trends and the emerging sort of customer-centric use cases. And MJ, I'm going to start with you in terms of looking at the current market trends, and how do you see Gen AI being used both now and in the future?
It's a very good question, right? Because there are many things that it can be used for, from knowledge engineering, helping with identifying the right information at the right time. So moving away from a search-based environment where the results you're getting is a set of documents, you need to read the document and take action, to a point where you've got an actionable summary, potentially even processes steps that allow you to do whatever business activity you needed to do directly. So kind of knowledge engineering, business process optimization, and all of that aspects. The other aspect, which is equally important and equally valuable in various enterprises, is the co-pilot element. So participating in the validation of human production. For example, identifying the code coverage of code as you write it, and suggesting how to expand that code coverage, how to write unit tests, validating a process to see if there are gaps or missing steps, or things that need to be slightly adjusted to meet regulatory compliance, those sort of things. There's also all of the human interaction for things like booking a plane ticket, all the chatbot operations, which are not only in the way we've been playing with it on ChatGPT, give me the life of this 14th century poet, but applied to customer support, customer interaction, execution on commerce websites, etc., etc. So it's process optimization for people that are not aware of the process.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of use cases around those things that are extremely valuable in making technologies or systems accessible to new audiences.
Yeah.
And optimizing or reducing the time taken by some of those processes for people that who already knew the process.
So Imran, what have you seen in customers then when you're talking to them around the use cases that they're looking to address with LLMs?
Sure. So one use case that I've seen recently was the ability to look at publicly published documents, and in terms of medical drug interactions, things like that, and then taking that and combining it with internal known protein targets and sort of public reactions for adverse events, right? What can go wrong in a person? There's like almost multiple hundreds of thousands of things that can go wrong, and they're all described in very nice ontologies. And then combining that and allowing researchers to answer the question of, if I were to target this particular protein, what are the possible side effects, right? And that helps researchers very rapidly weed out things that will not work in terms of candidate drugs or candidate targets, and also, on the other hand, start building up a list of things that might actually be useful targets to start looking at, right? So that was one very concrete use case. Another use case that I've recently looked at was there's a bunch of trouble tickets that are in ServiceNow, and ServiceNow does not make it very easy to search past tickets. So the ability to ask an LL to one, bring all of the past tickets into something like MarkLogic, which can keep all of that history and make it searchable, and then two, ask an LLM of, hey, I have this problem. How can I resolve it? So that's a very fine use case, and that might also help reduce the amount of trouble tickets that are being submitted into ServiceNow as well, right? So those are some examples of use cases that I've seen.
Yeah. And I guess as well, I mean, it is generative AI, and there's that soundboarding of content for content creation. So looking at ways of generating content, putting content in context. So, you know, those smart authoring solutions whereby they're searching, the LLMs searching as they're typing to deliver back maybe complex information to say, oh, you meant this with this short acronym. You might want to put the link to that in your document, that type of thing. I know that there's a couple of customers that are playing around with that. And you know, if you had to give that one piece of advice to a customer that's looking at MarkLogic and Semaphore, what would be your advice to, one, get them started, and two, for them to see the most value in their business?
I always think about use cases first, right? What is the business value that you want to derive? And then when you take a use case, the way to go about test driving it is to take that use case and then find all of the sub use cases within it, and then pick one very narrow piece of the puzzle, which requires a small amount of knowledge. So you can build a very small knowledge graph, and then you can. What I would recommend is do sort of A/B testing, compare asking for that use case a general GenAI questions, and then also feeding it the right context and asking it the question and comparing the A and B and going, hey, what is different and what is working, and is it working better, right? So the idea is start small, start very specific. Do a lot of testing to understand how to give the Gen AI the right answers, sort of in its context window, a priori, before you start going in terms of volumes.
You know, Gen AI objectives for your organizations, they're no different than normal, you know, special projects. Let's call it that way, objectives. I mean, they need to be specific. Yes, they need to be measurable, and I think that's often the part that we're missing in discussions. How are you going to prove value? What metrics? It has to be realistic and relevant.
Yeah.
You know, often people come in with assumptions about how Gen AI behaves or might work, or et cetera, and we have to be realistic about what it is for and what it isn't for, and that's also something, you know, cost-wise, that we need to help people appreciate. I mean, the FinOps side of things is really critical, and time bound. Because I'm sure that with an infinite amount of time, we could have a fantastic solution. I mean, retraining an entire LLM could be a solution if time was no object. But you know, very few organizations have the time and the skill to actually do that. So treat it as a normal project.
I saw a headline for an article that, when is it time for the next, or when is it time for the chief AI officer? Because the Mayo Clinic just announced that they've got that role existing now. And I guess that comes under that translating the business goals. If the business goals are centered solely around AI, then that probably makes sense to have one of those, just to ensure that it's going to meet those. But also, I guess for businesses that don't have that, that are using AI as tools within their business, that could be an important role that comes up. And are you seeing that in customers? Are you getting more senior with the people that you're talking to? Are senior stakeholders involved? And
The point
So,
you're making here is a really interesting one, because the organizations where we see AI specific roles being created are organizations that have been looking at AI for a while, not just in the context of GPTs and LLMs and the latest versions of what everyone's talking about, but is only one fraction of the AI ecosystem. I mean, if you think about medical research, about pharma, etc., there are many other AI techniques, for comparing X-rays, for example, or MRI scans and those sort of things, which have been around for a while, are getting more and more accurate, are genuine lifesavers. And yes, I mean, it's fantastic that those things get talked about more as well as a result of how AI is in the news nowadays. So it's Gen AI has had a very positive impact in that some of the non-Gen AI and machine learning projects that we've been talking about for years are now getting the attention and the funding that they warrant.
Our founder, Chris Lindblad, came up with an academic background in AI. And one of the quotes which I remember from him, which is a classic really, is that something's only called AI when people don't understand it. And after that, it doesn't get called AI anymore. It just gets called LLM, or like whatever. It just becomes part of our vernacular. And the interesting thing here is that actually, where are we heading in terms of this kind of a massive hype around AI right now? We're heading to a point where AI is understood. We understand the complexities of doing an AI project, and it becomes just another technique in an engineering toolbox to give the business what they need to create the value for their customers. Most of us don't understand enough about AI, LLMs, and what they're good for and what they're not good for. We're stretching the bounds of what we can do with them. We're pleasantly surprised when it can do certain things. But I don't think we know the boundaries of what it can and can't achieve right now. But it will become part of our background tool set. Actually, what I want MarkLogic and Progress to be able to do for our customers is to become something of a trusted voice that helps them to navigate that process of figuring out what are LLMs good for, how do we use them most effectively, how do we get a project at the other end which is actually useful and provides business value. I think there's a lot of things that we see a lot of our customers working through, and there are different points in that process. But I want our customers to be successful in what they do there, and I want to be able to provide them with not just the tools, but the advice that they need to be able to be successful with these projects, and get to the point where it's just another technique, another tool in their toolbox for achieving what the business wants to achieve.
And I guess it's if we're taking that approach, it's that closing that gap between data and the technology. So it's about that developer experience, using those tools and making that as easy as they can for them to build on an agile data platform like MarkLogic and Semaphore. We're coming up now to the last topic, because I think we've covered up the strategic direction and things like that. We're coming up to the last topic. It's around ethical considerations within AI. It's looking at biases and fairness and the responsibility in AI deployments. Now, I would say that AI is not going to replace you. It'll be the man using AI next to you that will replace you. And I've said that for a while now. But Matthieu, where do you see the future of work in general, really, with generative AI and these tools as they grow and develop in efficacy and accessibility?
Well, the level of bias governance needed to control the environment for those tools is no different, I would say, than what we do for other data sources. I think the part that is less understood is how the data might be resurfacing in different contexts. Because the LLM's been trained, and therefore the answer might be used in any other subsequent answer it provides, etc. So the inbound risk is probably the same. The outbound risk is without common measure, given the multiplying effect. And the way to mitigate it as much as you can is proper data stewardship on the data sources you're using for RAG. Similarly, proper data stewardship for the data you're using for training if you end up training a model. If you can, and sometimes it is possible, model that bias, because very few data sources are created with a complete 360 coverage of the topics that they contain. I mean, they're built for one use case, for one application. They carry the data required by that application and not the rest, so long as you know what's missing, why it was created, when it was created. A lot of data is rear view mirror, how companies used to operate, how news and media used to report. You can't necessarily rely on it. You need to balance that out with your own editorial line, with your company culture, with the data you want to put at the forefront, and that's why RAG is so important in the way we were discussing it earlier on, because you can push the data that you own, you understand, you can model the bias for, and make sure that that's used instead of statistical knowledge and training data being used to fill the gaps in the context.
And
Yeah.
I would add to that in that in fact, a lot of my customers are saying, I don't want to use the older data at all, right? I want you to use the latest data. And by the very nature of MarkLogic's real-time update capabilities, we can prioritize the latest data in our search results and give that context, that latest context, to the Gen AI systems.
And adding on that again, using Semaphore, modeling the ontology, you can actually model the way you want to present the information. So modeling your understanding of the domain and how you want to push the domain rather than surfacing how the domain has been historically, even if history is only 2 weeks old, being discussed and presented.
Certainly think that Semaphore's UI allows for that dynamic knowledge model creation, management, additions. As terms and taxonomies change and evolve, it certainly seems that Semaphore helps in that area. Alan, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and just to pull this full circle, really, you started off talking about the man next to you using being replaced by him using the generative AI. So within Semaphore, yeah, we are looking at helping users become more productive with Semaphore building models using generative AI. So yeah.
Finally, Matthieu, well, this goes to everyone really, but why should businesses across the world, these large enterprise organizations, choose the Progress Data Platform technologies in their AI journey? What would you say is the reason for that?
If you think about the 3 challenges in building an AI solution, or in fact any data-driven solution, the first challenge, actually, where the first hurdle where many people fall, is a plumbing. Which technology to choose, how to connect them to each other. What is the maintenance effort associated with that? What is the design effort associated with that? How much engineering knowledge is in people's mind, and therefore, how going forward you will be sustaining your solution. So that aspect of the mechanics of plumbing is a really important one. Using the Progress Data Platform, you've got an integrated solution. You don't have to do DIY. You don't have to worry and fall on the first hurdle. The second hurdle is data prep and data quality. Many projects actually don't even get to that second hurdle. They fall at the first one. In the Progress Data Platform, we have a fantastic combination of tools, from Hub Central to do the harmonization of data, merging, matching, etc. Semaphore for the semantic analysis, Corticon for the business rules aspect. So a fantastic data enrichment pipeline to ensure that in the MarkLogic multimodal database, we've got high quality data. And we get on the third leg of the strategy, which is exploring and operationalizing data. Again, a really complicated thing to do when you think about the multi-channel delivery system we're talking about today. Yes, we've got your GenAI projects, your chat projects, you've got content generation, you've got self-service portals, you've got line of business applications that can be optimized by re-injecting data that we harvested from them. So many different ways of slicing and dicing data, not only to do analytics, but also to operationalize, create new data operationalization approach, essentially new systems, new processes, new digital services, new decision support systems. That ability to very quickly build new services and new apps on top of your data is critical as well.
Yeah.
So in the Progress Data Platform, we can provide you with those three pillars in a usable way, highly secure, and at scale.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd like to add to that is normally when you're thinking about data, unfortunately, people think about rows and columns and tables and fields. We elevate the discussion to what are your business objects? How are those business objects related to each other? What are the semantic concepts that you need to find those business objects accurately, to ask questions of those business objects? And so the discussion of the data prep becomes much more natural because the subject matter experts can participate in the data preparation and the data modeling aspects of the data. And once you have that foundation really tightly knit and figured out for your business, dialed in, so to speak, then you can provide the right data to the GenAI system so that they have the right context and don't hallucinate, right?
Yeah, and finally on that point, if you've got all that dialed in, what's really interesting is the side benefits of all of that, which is the governance of your data, the harmonization of your data, the data finally in one place that's usable for multiple applications, that can grow and change as these new technologies evolve with those as well. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting time ahead.
I mean, if there's one thought to bring out of this is that the success of your GenAI LLM project is going to be largely about what you do with your data. And that's our bread and butter. That's what we've been doing for years and years. And that's why we've created the Progress Data Platform and brought these tools together. And so, because we've been solving this for years, we know that we can solve it for your LLM project, because ultimately, actually, it boils down to the same things that we've been helping customers with for years. And so from that perspective, we definitely should be considered as something that's fundamental and core to any kind of Gen AI project.
So we've reached the customer question portion of our session today, and so I'm just going to go through as many of these as I can in the time in the time allowed. I promise I won't put you on the spot with any difficult ones, but if we don't get to your question for whatever reason, then we'll make sure to follow up with you after the event. So first question, which is, how can businesses use AI to understand and engage their customers with less risk of compromising privacy? So that customer privacy, that data privacy, information privacy.
Basically, different customers and different users will have different rights to the data, right? A really good example is if you have customer support that is in Europe versus America versus somebody that is a special a celebrity customer support representative, right? So the European customer support representative should only be able to see the data about European customers because of all of the GDPR type of stuff that goes on there, right? In the U.S., of course, it's more of a free for all, and I'm unfortunately in the U.S. So from a consumer perspective, I don't like that. But the idea behind the customer support representative taking advantage of a Gen AI system for the data that's in your enterprise, and in this particular scenario that I've spelled out, the data for Europe should only be available to the European Gen AI responses, and the data for the US should only be available to the US Gen AI responses, and so on, right? So if you can tie your data to your use case, then you can tie your security to the Gen AI as well.
Yeah. And we've mentioned the Progress Data Platform, and there's the question here that says, you know, I'm a MarkLogic customer. Where does that line delineate between MarkLogic and Semaphore in that platform discussion? Where would I need MarkLogic above? Where would I need, sorry, Semaphore, say, for instance, when I've got MarkLogic?
So they're very complementary technologies. MarkLogic is a multimodal database, can store your documents, can store the knowledge graph. It can, through Data Hub, do all of the ingestion and harmonization. And it invokes in the process a number of other technologies like Semaphore, like Corticon, to further enrich the data during processing. On the retrieval side, similarly, you can use Semaphore and MarkLogic in combination to achieve full semantic search. So very complementary.
And Alan, where would you say that line?
I was, one thing I was thinking of the other day actually is, Semaphore is very good at extracting facts and very good at zoning in on the correct context and structuring that and structured content. One thing that MarkLogic then brings to that is that ability to look across the corpus, if you like, and to integrate across disparate facts and disparate structured elements that have been extracted. So so not only are you getting that focused view in on the fact, you're getting those facts then integrated across the piece. So yeah.
Well, I think that is it for the questions. Like I say, we're running over time at the moment. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for joining us today. Thank you for joining us for this really fascinating roundtable. Hope to do these again soon in the future. If you'd like to see more, go to progress.com to learn more about how our technology is being used in the enterprise. Thanks very much for joining us. Hope to see you again soon.